Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, I got the privilege of talking to a gentleman who reached out to me. His name is Old Bear from the great state of West Virginia. How's it going today, Old Bear?
Oh, it's going pretty good.
That's great. Can you share what part of West Virginia you're from?
Yeah, I live near the state capital, Charleston, West Virginia.
Perfect. And we were talking a little bit before this interview. You sent me some info, and it sounds like you've been researching this creature for quite a long time.
Yeah, my journey started back when I was 16 years old. I had a sighting of a Bigfoot from about 20 feet away. And that spiked my interest into Bigfoot. The type of sighting that I had was, I was deer hunting, actually. I was a 16-year-old kid. First time my father ever let me go by myself when I was deer hunting during deer season. And it was a rifle season here in West Virginia. And this thing walked out from a boulder at about 20 feet away. And it was chasing some deer. And as a 16-year-old kid, I thought the sounds that it was making before it came into view sounded like a whitetail buck. And I already had a rifle up to my shoulder. And when I stepped out, I was, what in the world is that?
Can you describe those sounds for people that aren't familiar with what those sounds are?
Yeah, it was a grunt. That was the sound that it was making. And that's typically what a white-tailed deer does, a male deer, when it's chasing does, when they're in their breeding season, which is usually in the fall. And this was in December, and it was making those noises. And I'm thinking, because I'd already seen 3 does come out, and they looked like they'd been run pretty hard. So I thought, I'm a kid. I don't know about these things. I don't know there's Bigfoot in the world. Didn't know nothing about them. Never seen one. My family never talked about it, and wasn't in the know of Bigfoot. And those noises sounded to me like a white-tailed buck grunting, because it was following does that were in heat. And when it stepped out at 20 feet, it was a complete surprise to me, except for the year before I had seen the movie about the Bigfoot in Arkansas. And I watched it with my dad, and I'd asked, Dad, is that real? And Dad said, no, I've never seen anything like that. And they're not, that's just Hollywood. That was his explanation.
This is Boggy Creek, probably, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yes, it was the Boggy Creek monster. And it didn't look like the Boggy Creek monster. It didn't have super long hair all over its face. And it had long hair on it. But the thing was, it was 60 degrees that day, which is warm for that time of year around here. And I'm sitting there in a flannel shirt and a orange vest with an orange hat on, blue jeans, and sitting on the ground with a rifle. And this thing steps out, and the rifle's at my shoulder, and all I'm doing is looking down the barrel of the rifle at this thing, going, "Oh Lord, what in the world I don't know what you are, but don't look at me, don't come near me." That was the thought going through my head at the point. And at that point, it slowly turned towards me, and when it turned towards me, the facial expression on it, it looked like a early type of human, not modern human, but looked really human. And it looked at me like, where'd you come from? Because it raised its eyebrows and then opened its eyes up, and the eyes were coal black. And this is 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And at that point, I was scared, but through being raised up in the woods and as a young kid and having an older brother that was in the military, I knew to keep my emotions at bay as best I could, because this is a situation, I don't know if it's going to be life or death. I don't know if it's going to be, this thing's going to come up there and knock me into next week. So I'm still looking down the barrel at this thing, and it starts to grimace and starts to growl at me, a very deep, low growl. And it takes a step towards me at that point. And once it took that step, I thought in my head, this thing's going to come up here and harm me. And I'm a 16-year-old kid. I'm a pretty big kid because I played football and did all that stuff. And at that point, I put my thumb on the hammer on the rifle that I had. And it to take that second step. And when it took the second step, I pulled the hammer back to full cock, where all I have to do is squeeze the trigger. And now I'm looking down the sights thing, and I have the sight squarely on its nose. It heard that click, and then it stood a little more erect, because when it walked out, it was hunched forward, knees bent, and it was hunting the same as I was. Just I had to be choosy about what I did, or what animal that I could shoot legally at that point. And once it started to take that second step, and I pulled the hammer back, and that click, and it was very quiet in the woods. There wasn't even a chipmunk or a squirrel or a bird making any kind of sound. And at that point, once it heard the click, it perked up a little bit and looked at me, and it stopped growling at me. And then it was showing its teeth when it growled at me, and it closed its mouth. And then it started turning its upper body, looking for a way to get out of there. And it finally went back the way that it came. And at this point, whenever it disappeared and I could hear it running off, I stood up and started towards the road, which I was just 2 benches, which are 2 flats off from the road. And I got to the road, and I didn't hear it anymore running. And then it screamed at me. I would have to say probably 200 yards or more away. And when it screamed at me was when I started losing it. I'm 16 years old. I'm a big kid. Football, back then you were taught men don't cry, men don't get upset. And that was the attitude that I had. But at that point, I was completely scared, intimidated, because this thing was 7.5, 8 foot tall. It was broad in the shoulders, probably 3.5, 4 foot across the shoulders, long hair, and it was not happy with me. So I went back to where my dad had parked the vehicle we were in, and my dad was coming out the road, and he looked at me and he said, "What in the world was that noise? Is that somebody out there doing something, some kids or something like that? I don't want to talk about it. I just want to go home." And my dad looked at me and said, "No, we're going to hunt until it gets dark." And I said, "Dad, I want to go home now." And by this time, it's after 3 o'clock, and we'd only been there a few hours, and he's going, "What happened?" And I'm not talking about it. And I went to the back of the vehicle and unloaded my rifle, put it in the gun case, took my vest and hat off, and got in the passenger seat and locked the door. And my dad come over and he's, "You're serious?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to go home." He unloaded his rifle, got in the driver's seat, and said, "What's going on?" And he kept asking me, and I'm like, "Dad, I just go home." And we started back out the road and had to go right past where this had just happened. And when I reached that point, I started crying. And my dad looked over and he said, "What are you crying for?" I said, "Dad, I don't want to talk about it. I don't know. I don't know how to explain this." And we got out on the blacktop. His son is sitting beside him, pretty much bawling like a little kid. Dad was worried. It took us an hour to get back to the interstate. And once we got on the interstate, he said, "You're going to tell me what's going on." And when he said that, and in the tone that he said, I knew that I had to answer him and tell him what was going on. And I told him, and the only thing he said to me when I got done was, "Don't tell your mother or your grandmother." And that started a long 39 years of knowing about Bigfoot. And it's been a long process to trying to figure out what these creatures are. Are they harmful to humans? And it's been a long road. A lot of miles walking through the hills of West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and other states here in the Southeast. In the research that I found, these creatures, I've found that most of them don't want nothing to do with us. They don't want to interact with us. They don't want to be bothered with us humans because we're dangerous. Most times when somebody sees one, they've got a gun or they got some kind of weapon in their hand, typically when they run into humans, whether it's spring, summer, or fall, or winter. And they don't want anything to do with us. They've been shot at for hundreds of years here in the U.S. alone and across the world, and they're afraid of us. Most of them are. But I've also found that there's some out there, Bigfoot out there, that kind of want to turn us into dinner. And I've had a few experiences with those types, and it's always been a struggle to survive. And because they're so big and powerful and they're so aggressive, and the way that they do things, it's always like they're a military unit, and that's how they act. Even the ones that don't have anything to do with us, they act more like there is a general, which I've found out over the years is the big male alpha. And what he says goes, and the clan does what he says. And it can be dangerous. If you get too close to them, they let you know. They may show themselves, or they may make screams or howls or whatever, and they throw rocks. Most usually when they throw rocks, they don't try to hit you. But when you're too close, they may throw rocks and hit you with them, not enough to kill you, but to get you to leave. And it's been like that ever since I got started in going out in the woods and walking around trying to find footprints and hair and all this stuff. And I found all that. It's just over the years, I found out no matter how much you bring in, science is not going to do anything about them or list them as real until science has one on a metal table somewhere.
That's an incredible first encounter, Old Bear, to have. After you told your father, he said not to tell your grandmother and your mother. Do you think he ever had an experience himself, or why do you think he didn't want you to tell those certain individuals about what happened?
He told me that because if it got to mom and grandma, because my grandmother was his mother, and if I told mom, that's his wife, and the women of the house don't have a lot of say-so from generations before. But if it's something that's going to harm their children or possibly harm a grandchild, they can overrule dad. And it was a very harrowing experience for me, and it affected me for quite a long time. And I actually quit hunting because of it for about 3 years, and I didn't go. I didn't go with my dad and my brothers. They still would go, and I'm like, no, just don't feel good, or I got schoolwork to do. I'd make excuses and wouldn't go. And my dad knew it. But if mom and grandma knew what happened, none of us would have been going hunting ever again. My older brother had a wife. I'm pretty sure that would have affected, she would have been told, and that would have been the end of him going. And the same with mom. You're not taking my boys out in the woods, and these things are out there. You're not going to get one of my kids killed. And dad was the boss, but mom can exert her boss, and dad would have to listen.
Oh,
and that's
absolutely. Sometimes in stories like this, accounts, it comes out that other relatives themselves have had encounters. Was that the case in your family, that you found out along the way that other people had seen things as well?
Yeah, it took me 30 years to find out that my dad and my uncle, they heard screams one night, and they were out fishing and camping on a river here in West Virginia, not far from where I had my encounter. And they heard screams, and something came around the camp that they had set up that night. And they had seen these things, seen one walk between the camper, because they had a sliding camper at the time, and it walked between the camper and the fire that they had outside. And they never said a word about it to anybody. And my dad told me that 30 years later.
Okay. So your encounter happened in early 70s, correct? Because that would have been around the time that Boggy Creek came out.
No, it was 1984.
1984. Okay.
Yeah. And I've never heard of the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek until the year before, and it came on a Saturday night. It was one of those, back then they had movies they would play on Saturday nights around 9 or 10 o'clock, and it was always a scary movie.
Gotcha.
It was Bela Lugosi as Dracula or Frankenstein or something like that, and they had that movie on a Saturday night, and we watched it, and it was just one of those things. You saw it, and it was like, it scared me, and my dad was, nah, that's no big deal. Don't worry about it. That's not real. It's just Hollywood.
Right.
It's like Dracula and Frankenstein.
So you said that your experience and your father's experience happened in similar areas. Is that an area that, are you able to share? Was it near a certain river or state forest or anything like that for context for listeners?
Yeah, it's near the Little Kanawha River. It seems like that is a corridor. What I've found over the years, they tend to follow that river between Ohio and the eastern mountains here in West Virginia, where it originates.
Can you repeat that name one more time? Sorry.
The Little Kanawha River.
Okay, Little Kanawha River. Interesting. I'm sure there'll be a few listeners that'll be interested in info like that. You have your experience, and then for a few years, definitely you're not going into the woods, you're not going hunting. Was there a point that you transitioned more into someone that you were trying to figure out, okay, what is this creature that I saw, or how did that come about that you started looking into Bigfoot over these years after you had your experience?
After about 3 years, my dad told me on a Friday night, tomorrow you're going with me. And I'm like, Dad, I know you're going hunting. I don't want to go. You know what happened. He said, I don't want to hear it. Enjoyed going hunting. You can go with me tomorrow, stay with me the whole time, and not have to worry about it. By this point, I'm 19. I'm over 18. I'm 19 years old, and it was, you're going with me. You're a grown man. You can deal with this. It's no big deal. So I went with him, and I tried to make excuses. He wouldn't let me stay at the truck, and it was a family outing. My older brother was there, my younger brother, my brother-in-law was there. There was 5 of us. And I went with my dad and walked with my dad all day, and we talked. And that kind of helped a lot to get back out in the woods. And at that point, I was like, Dad, I really want to find out what this thing is. And he's like, find out and let me know. At that point, I got interested in trying to figure out what these creatures were. And I started going out on weekends and stuff, because at this point, when I had time home, because I did things back then, I had went and was doing things in the military. And when I would come home, I would go looking around here in West Virginia. And it kept progressing from that point. I needed to know more about these things. I need to find them. I need to know where they are. And I kept looking, and I kept making mistakes and kept failing at it. Couldn't find them, couldn't find footprints. And finally, after I was about 23, 24 years old, I ran into a guy here in West Virginia that kind of took me under his wing and told me he knew about them for 40 plus years, because he seen me. He was a young man of about, I think, 24, 25 years old. And he told me his encounter, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. You had a pretty docile encounter. You started looking into these, and he was an old country boy, and he knew the woods, and he kept finding them and kept finding prints and kept seeing them. And he took me under his wing and showed me what he knew. And then we started seeing them, and he would get reports from places here in West Virginia, in the eastern part of the state, in Greenbrier County, Randolph County, Pendleton County, Pocahontas County. And we'd go to those places and look around and see what we could find. And he would consistently find them. We would find deer carcasses where they evidently killed a deer and stripped it clean. And it could be other animals doing it, but you wouldn't find sharp tooth marks. You wouldn't find knife marks in them, or a person would kill them and then cut the meat up and everything like that. You would find a carcass that was ripped apart, and it was a sign that it had to be a creature that was able to rip their legs off and break their neck. We found quite a few at that time with their necks completely broken and ripped apart. And he took me under his wing. I was with him about 5 or 6 years, and we went out on an investigation of some aggressive Bigfoot. And while we were out on that investigation, it's the middle of January, and he disappeared. And that was a pretty tough time.
He disappeared completely?
Yeah, he was never found.
Oh, wow.
I found his hat 3 weeks later at the entrance to a cave with a rock stuck on top of it, and that's all that I ever found.
Can you share this gentleman's name at all?
Yeah, his name was Robert Henderson.
Robert Henderson? What time frame would that have been?
That would have been in the late 90s.
Late 90s.
Around 94, 95, maybe. Because I met him, I was 20 years old when I met him. And when he disappeared was when I was 25. I'd gotten married. And right after we got married is when he disappeared.
What do you think happened to him?
I think they grabbed him, because the man was 75 feet from me. I had walked up behind a tree and was using the bathroom. And when I stepped behind from the tree, he's nowhere in sight. The Bigfoot in that area had kept hunters out of that hollow and off that ridge that ran around that hollow for evidently for quite some time, and people wouldn't go in there. And we went in there, and I came out alone and called the state police and was told it was a bear attack, and that was the narrative that I was told.
Was there anything that told you from what you saw that was a bear attack? Or
No, I've hunted bear pretty much most of my adult life, and never, ever, not even a grizzly. We had a black bear in the state of West Virginia, and a grizzly bear will drag you off a short ways or just cover you over with some dirt or forest litter and go a short ways away from you and wait and then feed on you from then on. Even a grizzly will do that. The black bear will do it. Yeah, they've been known to kill men, but it's a gory scene. There was no blood. There was nothing that said that he was attacked by a bear. We would have found his body.
Can you provide any specifics as to where this particular area was, that there's this hollow or there's the cave?
Yeah, it's actually in Nicholas County where we were at, was near Summersville Lake. Actually, it was near the backside of Summersville Lake.
Summersville Lake.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers lake they put in a long time ago. The dam's not a concrete dam. It's a rock dam that they built, and it was to dam up the waters off the Kanawha River because people were getting flooded out every year. When the heavy rains would come in the spring, and it would flood people out all the full length of the gully where it would go in and meet the new and become the Kanawha River.
You're saying that the Bigfoot in this area are pretty aggressive?
Yeah, they call them the Yahoo.
The Yahoo. Isn't that kind of close to that new park in West Virginia, New River Gorge?
It's actually 3 ridges over from the gorge.
Do you think that's a coincidence, or I don't know?
It's a coincidence in the point of that lake area. You can go in there and hunt, but no one goes on the backside of the lake to deer hunt or to bear hunt or anything. I've been in there since this, and I've never found a fresh bear track or bear droppings, and you don't ever see hardly any squirrels in there. Deer are pretty much the only time they go through there, I do believe, is if they run through there. And once they get in there, they run out as fast as they can, or else they don't make it. There is no sound. There's no birds, no squirrels, no chipmunks. They don't make noise. It's quiet, eerily quiet.
Have you looked for Bigfoot signs and et cetera in that area since then, or?
Yeah, I've been in there 4 or 5 times since that happened, and I found prints in there, and I made casts of them, and I've seen a Bigfoot in there. And one night I went in there, we had been in there bow hunting, me and my younger brother and a friend of ours were in there bow hunting that morning. We never found a deer track, nothing that was less than 6 months old. Didn't find any bear tracks, didn't find no deer tracks. Seen one squirrel that morning, and it was in high gear whenever I saw it. And that evening I went back in there because I thought it was strange, because I found a partial print, and it was a mile away from where we had parked when I found the print, and it was just the toes and the front pad, which it could have been a bear. It had 5 toes, but it still was kind of strange. That was the only thing, and never found any claw marks, because a bear has claws on its front feet and back feet, and there was no claw marks. It was just like toe marks and the pad of the foot. And I went back in there that evening right at dark after we'd come home, and I drove all the way back up there, and I went in there, and right at dark, I heard a scream from probably a quarter of a mile away, and it was towards the bottom, towards the lake itself. And then I heard another scream, and it was probably 200 yards away. And at that point, I'm like, I'm here by myself. This is stupid. This is an area where my friend disappeared. I need to get out of here. And I started back towards my truck and had to go around a mud hole and had to walk up on the bank. And when I say a mud hole, it's probably feet long and about 8 foot wide. And if you put a vehicle in it and it got big tires on it, big mud tires, you're not getting out of it unless you use come-alongs, or now you can use winches. But back then, all we had was the hand crank come-alongs. And I had to go around it to get to my vehicle, and so I could leave. And when I stepped up on the bank, something pushed a tree over, not a big tree, something substantial, about a 6-inch thick tree, and it knocked the top of the tree, knocked me off the edge of the bank, and I ended up in the mud hole, and I had to scramble to get out of it. And when I got out of it, it screamed at me from where the tree was pushed over. And I thought, I'm going to go home. And I went and got my vehicle, mud covered, soaking wet, got in my vehicle, and I did the smart thing. I'd already turned my vehicle around. As soon as I got in, threw the key in the ignition, started up, put in gear, and left. I've been in there, and they are aggressive. They just didn't want me there. They don't want nobody there. And people that live up there in the town around the lake, which is called Summersville, is the name of the town, they talk about hearing screams in there all the time, if you can get them to talk about it.
And sorry, refresh my memory. So that the time you just told me about where you heard the screams, that was also the time where you saw the creature as well?
Yeah, I've seen the creatures in there. That probably 2 months before, when I was in there, I've seen one walking through, and I left the area because it automatically knew I was there. And somehow, way, shape, or form, whether it smelled me or it heard me coming in or whatever, and I left because I didn't want to mess with those, because the stories and accounts from people that these things would run them out of the woods, not walk them out, not walk along with them. They would chase them out. And I didn't want to mess with that. And then it was 2 months later, we went up there to bow hunt, and that was when I seen the partial footprint and no other prints that were less than 6 months old. And I left and then came back that night and then had a tree pushed down on top of me. Not on top of me, but
right,
enough to knock me off the bank.
Oh, wow. That's wild. When's the last time you've been in this area?
It's been about 1.5 years ago.
Okay. I see there's a few wildlife areas around this lake. I'm looking at it on a map right now. There's a Summersville Lake State Wildlife Area. If you look at Summersville Lake, yep.
If you go to the very back of it, there's a big, humongous horseshoe-type hollow at the back part of it.
Uh-huh.
And that's where they tend, and it's very steep in there, and it's rugged territory in there. It's almost straight up and down. It's really hard to hunt it in there. They timbered that area probably 40 or 50 years ago. And they planted trees and oaks, and they planted some pines in there, and it's all grown up now. And it's pretty steep territory, and the only places to walk is on the logging roads that were in there. And there's not very many benches. And when I say a bench, it's just a flat side part of the hill. And it's so thick in there. I mean, there's multiple rows in there. There's rhododendrons in there. There is mountain laurel in there. It's just really thick. It's like going into like the Amazon and having to cut your way through it just to walk through it.
Do you have any advice for someone? Let's say there's an individual where they're like, yeah, I'm a Bigfoot researcher, and yeah, I'm going to try to go to a place like this to see if I can encounter a creature like this. Do you have any advice for an individual like that?
what I've found out over the years is if a Bigfoot clan or a family unit is in that area, they're in there for a reason. They don't want to be bothered. They tend to be aggressive towards people coming in there, and they defend their territory by throwing stuff at you, whether it's a tree limb or a rock or chasing you out of there. And when that happens, the best thing to do is just turn, go back the way you came. Don't deviate from it. Don't take shortcuts. Just use the same route that you came in on. Get yourself out of there. Because at that point, if you do something different from what you did when you came in, they tend to get a little bit more upset and they get more aggressive. Anytime a Bigfoot is aggressive towards you, the best thing to do is to back out and go away. Go home.
That's good advice. I want to ask you a question. It's just going to be a left field one. Just in case it jogs anything in your memory. There's an individual that was going to talk to me a long time ago, and it never turned into anything. And eventually I'd have no way to contact the individual now, but it was somewhere in, I believe it was southern West Virginia. And he said that his family had encountered over the years where there's almost a group of Bigfoot that were trying to run them out of their home. Is that anything you've ever heard, or have you ever heard a scenario where like a Bigfoot is trying to run someone out of their home, off their property, anything like that?
Let me ask you a question. Do you remember the county or the area or a city name?
No, unfortunately,
Like
I was not given any of that info. No.
After about 20 years or about 15 years of doing this, I did go down to southern West Virginia, and if I'm not mistaken, I know the person you're talking about.
No way.
I went in there to help that family. Yes, sir.
Oh, dear.
And we went in there. I went in there with another guy, a friend of mine from the military, and we went in there, and those Bigfoot were super aggressive. They did not like humans. They looked like the ones that we saw two, and both of them had a very heavy brow ridge, and they looked like Cro-Magnon man. Like Cro-Magnon man on steroids with the height of Shaquille O'Neal plus a foot or two. And those Bigfoot that we encountered, we ended up having to set out flashbangs around these people's homes. And they got the message through force. We didn't have to shoot at any of them. We didn't have to shoot none to kill them. We just discharged a couple of 12 gauges, and when they ran into the flashbangs, they got the message that they weren't wanted there. And that lasted about 3 nights when we went in and did that investigation. And they were coming to this person's house. They had killed their dog. They had been caught looking in the windows at night at the daughter, and they were making a real big nuisance of themselves. And there was other things that had went on that I don't really think I should say.
Yeah, I respect that, because obviously the person doesn't want to talk to me.
But he probably wouldn't talk to you. It would give too much information, and it would tell exactly where they are.
Yeah, sure.
Then you would have all these people going there, and they didn't want that. And that's the reason he only asked me to bring one person with me. And we did everything that we could to get these Bigfoot, short of having to kill them, to understand that you need to leave this family alone. And if you don't leave them alone, it's going to progress. And those Bigfoot got the hint after the third night of running into all those flashbangs, and they left.
Have you ever heard of a situation in West Virginia, or I guess any of that, you've been to multiple states, of where a specimen has been gathered?
Yeah. there was an instance that happened here in West Virginia about 2 years ago that U.S. military was involved in, or at least the government was involved in, and they killed a clan of Bigfoot that had killed a young couple. And that happened in Jackson County, West Virginia.
Wow, just a few years ago. Wow.
Yeah, they killed the whole clan. And they retrieved all the bodies, and I guess they did their experiments or whatever on them. I don't know what they did to the bodies, but because I'm not privy to that information, but I knew the person that this happened on his property. And this young couple was from Ohio. And strangely enough, I knew the man's uncle because I had done an investigation at his uncle's farm. And that was a sticky situation. Very sticky.
So why was that a sticky situation?
These Bigfoot were killing cattle, and they were of the type that I call the Genoskwa. They eat their own kind. They eat nothing but meat. They will eat humans. These things had actually come to the house and tried to get into the house one night, and for him having a shotgun loaded with slugs, they would have been in the house and probably killed the whole family. And it was a sticky situation because of the people that contacted me was a trooper at the time for the state of Ohio. And we went down and had to deal with those Bigfoot. And that was a messy situation. And then after we dealt with it, the men in the khaki pants and boots and polo shirts showed up.
Tell me about those individuals.
Those individuals did not show credentials, but you could tell by their haircuts that they were with the government in some way, shape, or form from one of the alphabet entities of the federal government. And you could tell by the way that they carried themselves that you either bow down and do what we say and say what we tell you to say, or it's not going to be good for you. And they told us all that in very uncertain terms. And I just looked at them and laughed. I said, you're never going to stop me from telling the truth about these creatures. And you just need to back off. And then 20 years later, this kid, well, not 20 years, it's probably 12 years, this nephew comes to West Virginia, and they found their bodies and told them they were killed by bears. And then that's when the U.S. government sent in kill teams and destroyed the whole plant.
They destroyed the property?
No, they didn't destroy the property. They went in it and took the camper that young couple was staying in, because the man that I knew here in Jackson County, I deer hunted on his property.
Okay.
And he called me. He knew what I was doing and called me and said that he had a young couple that disappeared, and I was going out there. And when I got out there, there was a group of men there in a black van. And I was told in uncertain terms I had to leave, and his wife and him were forced to leave. And they went and found them, and they were taken to either a coroner or someone in the federal government, took their bodies, and they were found and I found out through some friends that are still in the federal government, and that the young couple I was told about how the pickup was destroyed. He had an S10 pickup that was old. The windshield busted out of it, steering wheel ripped up and sticking out over top of the hood of the pickup. Blood all over the inside of the pickup. She was found in the camper, ripped apart, and part of her was found in a tree 100 yards away. And they found their bodies cleaned the area, and then a week later they were in there, and I guess they had found the clan where they were staying in a cave and killed them all.
In Jackson
I was told
County.
the bodies were taken out. Yeah.
Wow, man, that is a very interesting situation. The owner of that property, do they talk about the event, or I'm guessing they probably don't?
The property that he owns, him and his wife no longer live there. They were told that they had to leave, and they went to Florida and stayed with his daughter, who lives down in Jacksonville, Florida. And they came back, and when they came back, all of their stuff in their house was gone. And it was shipped to Florida, put into one of the 2 spaces down there, and it was paid up for 6 months. And he's wanted to sell the property, but every time he tries to sell it, for reason or another, the bank financing is not going through. And his property taxes here in West Virginia, you pay property on your real estate property.
Sure.
And they're paid up for 10 years.
I feel like someone listening knows more about this story, and hopefully they'll reach out. Is that a thing where you've ever gone back to that property to research it, or pretty much stayed away from it?
Oh, I went back there, and the cave, there's only one cave on that whole property. And that cave, I've been in it before when I deer hunted. When it would start pouring the rain or something, that's where I would go and sit. And I've been in that cave and looked around it. And it stretches back in there probably 100 feet, and then it starts narrowing down, and there's another way out. But if you got a bunch of gear or whatever on, you're not going to get fit through it. You have to wiggle your way through, and it comes out on the other side of the hill. And I've been back there since this happened, and what happened was the cave is caved in. Okay. It's like something, all of a sudden the hillside came down on top of it, but it's all bedrock. So why would it come down?
That is so interesting.
And the other entrance is closed off also.
Has there ever been a time when you've been out doing your research over all these years where things escalated very quickly and you're like, I'd rather not be here in this situation anymore. I need to get out of here? Oh
yeah. That's happened probably a total of 8 to 9 times.
Okay.
Over 30 plus years. The first time that ever happened, I was escorted out by a Bigfoot that would show itself just enough to let me know that it was there and I needed to leave. You get a feeling when you're being watched by, I don't know if it's just our sixth sense as a human being. We have 5 senses we rely on every day.
Sure.
But everybody has that feeling. Everybody's had that feeling of being watched. That was the feeling that I was getting. And when I was being watched, this Bigfoot started showing itself and it would move closer to me. And at that point, I know that after that period of time, I knew that meant they wanted me to go. So I left, and the whole time walking out, if I stopped to take a drink of water, it would show itself. And there's been other times when I've been out there and they'll scream at you from 50 yards away or 50 feet away. And when they scream at you from that distance, you should leave. They're not happy. They're mad. You've done something to upset them. And once you upset them, it's like upsetting a 2-year-old. You took their 2-year-old's toy away from it. They throw temper tantrums. And when they get that mad and they start pounding their chest or they start rocking back and forth and they're letting themselves be known, they want you gone. They don't want you there. They want you to leave. And there's been a couple of times when I've seen ones that you don't want to look at. They're ugly. They look like a demon walking around with hair all over it. And there's huge, 9, 10 feet, 12 foot. And they have tusks protruding from either their lower jaw or upper jaw. And they don't want you. They look at you like you're food.
Did you say?
I've been in that situation.
Did you say tusks? Can you explain what that means a little bit more?
Mm-hmm. I say tusks. What it is actually their canine teeth, because their teeth generally look like ours, and they have canines, but most of them don't have long canines that protrude out of their mouth. Most of them, the food that they eat, it grinds those down. But when they eat meat, it breaks up their teeth and they get real jagged, and their canines seem to extend further outside of their lip. It may be an inch long outside the mouth, or it might be half an inch. But they have what I would call tusks. They're a meat eater, and seem to be the ones that eat meat all the time, whether it's human, deer, bear, whatever, or other Bigfoot. And they develop long teeth that protrude out of their mouths.
Got it. Yeah, that's very interesting. Have you ever had any interactions with, I don't know if you're familiar with the creature called Dogman at all?
Yeah, I saw 3 one time in my life doing an investigation for a man up in Pocahontas County, and 3 successive Saturdays seen one that looked more like a coyote, and then I saw one that looked like a dog, a domesticated dog, and then on the third one it looked like a werewolf from Underworld. And I don't mess with them. Those actually scare me.
You spent many years looking into the subject of Bigfoot and researching the different areas. When people ask you what you feel Bigfoot is, what's your response to that?
I feel Bigfoot is an ancient creature that came about being from biblical times, what they call the Nephilim.
Sure.
Goliath was a Nephilim, and I believe that they were in other societies at the time, not in Israel, not with the children of Israel, and they got pushed out and became feral, able to understand language, different languages over the years. They've learned the languages and they understand English. And everybody says they have their own language. Yeah, but it's just, I ran across quite a long time ago, I ran across a person that kind of analyzed and slowed down the Sierra sounds. And from what they say, that they are a combination of languages. Once you slow it down, it's a combination of human language and with English in it and 5 or 6 other different languages like Russian or Chinese or Japanese or languages like that. And these creatures are they're very smart. They're really smart. I believe they can think on the same level that we do. They're militaristic. The alpha male is the boss. Everybody answers to him. And he has a heavy hand if someone messes up in the clan, he's the one that disciplines, no matter what size they are. He's the boss. He's the general. If you mess up in the military and the general comes down on your head, you might be in a stockade as a human. But as a Bigfoot, that heavy hand of his comes down and smashes you across the face, whether you're male or female. And, I've seen these things fight each other. I walked in one time and seen 2 big males fighting, and that's not a very fun thing to do. I mean, they get in a fight with each other. It's heavy blows because of their size and their muscle build.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you share any more details about that situation? Was that in a certain part of West Virginia, or any other details about when you saw that happen?
That happened in Kentucky.
Okay.
Daniel Boone National Forest.
Oh dear.
went down there because I heard about Bigfoot. Reports had came in about other people seeing Bigfoot in that area and the Bigfoot being aggressive, and went down there into the forest and went way back out into that forest and heard screams, and I went in to investigate it, me and two other guys, and we went into it, walked in there, and it was late evening when we got in there, and these two Bigfoot were pushing each other around, and then one of them took a swing, and it was on from there. They were punching each other, trying to gouge each other's eyes out, rolling around on the ground, throwing each other around. And this was not a wrestling match. This was a all-out Katie bar the door fight.
Right. Exactly.
I would make it to where, in human terms, a bar fight that the two biggest guys in the bar got in a fight and everything's getting broken.
Did you stay around long for that, or is it something where you cleared out pretty quick?
No, we stuck around for about probably 2 minutes. And after about 2 minutes of them fighting like that, it was over and done with. Mm. One of them limped away and the other one just turned and walked away. Didn't scream, didn't holler, didn't pound his chest, just turned and walked away. Both of them were hurting, most assuredly. And after that point, we left, and it was the other two guys, one of the guys was with me. He had lost control of himself. Mm-hmm. And me and the other guy, we were thoroughly scared at that point. It was a situation that you walk into a fight and you're like, if one of them would hit one of us, we'd be dead instantly. Mm-hmm. And we left and went back to the vehicle. When we got back to the vehicle, it was dark when we got back to the vehicle. And we got in a truck and we went to a convenience store, and somebody went in and bought beer, and I drove, and those guys drank all the way home. They went through like a case and a half of beer on the way home. And I don't think they were drunk.
Yeah. Have you made it over to Land Between the Lakes ever?
I drive truck, and I've been past there a bunch of times. Okay. And I want to go there and do investigations in there, and have tried to find people to go, and nobody wants to go in there. Nobody wants to go in there and deal with that situation. It doesn't bother me. You're fearful from what I've heard from the Land Between the Lakes, because now that my wife goes with me, I'm fearful because even though she carries a big handgun, uh-huh. I still have to protect her. And those creatures over there seem to be super aggressive towards humans when they've had sightings. And I know about the incident in the LBL about that family getting ripped apart.
Sure.
And that tends to bother me a little bit, because now my wife's going to be with me, uh-huh. and tried to get other people to go. And nobody wants to go over there and do any kind of investigation in there. And it's just, I want to go. I'm itching to go. It's just, I know better than to go by myself and do a situation like that.
That's a wise idea. I can think of probably a few people that would want to contact you. Is there a way that people can contact you?
Yeah. They can reach out to me at oldbearsden2019@gmail.com.
Okay.
They can reach out to me an email, and I'll send them my phone number, and they can contact me via the phone at that point.
Awesome. So I will put that in the show notes so people can contact you directly. I can think of a few people that might extend the invitation to you for LBL. Mm-hmm. Old Bear, this has been a really fascinating chat, and I appreciate you coming on a weekend. It's been a really fun time chatting with you.
I appreciate that. And I'm glad that you called me. And if anybody needs help, you can contact me through my email, and then we'll talk about your situation.
Yes, sir. If you could be on the phone for just a few minutes, I got one more question for you. But thank you so much for coming on. I hope some people reach out to you about the different things that you have been talking about today. Thank you, Old Bear.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Here at Bigfoot Society, our goal is to provide a platform for those that have encountered Bigfoot to share their encounter in a safe environment. But we need to hear your story. If you've experienced something that you just can't explain, please send me an email at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Then we can start the conversation. I know a lot of you have not shared your encounter at all. It's been 20 years. And it's time that you get this off your chest, and then you can get some well-deserved rest, because I know you haven't been sleeping. I understand what you're going through, and I appreciate every one of you listening.
You're listening to Bigfoot Society podcast, hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can, by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Slaya. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list.
These are all in Oregon, by the way. Oak Ridge, Dexter, Fall Creek, Deschutes National Forest area, Cultus Lake, Spirit Lake, Subtle Lake, McKenzie River area, Sweet Home area, the area west of Crater Lake, east of 230 West Diamond Lake Highway, and north of 62 Crater Lake Highway.
You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.